Hi everybody. Welcome to week 8. We're officially halfway through the semester now. So you are all doing really well. I'm happy with the progress we're making so far. So let's get into what we want to talk about this week. And this week is another little bit of a diversion, and I think it's an important one because it gets to why we actually do strategic planning in the first place. As I like to do, I'm going to just review where we've been. And again, where we've been is really setting up today's lecture, this week's lecture, and what we want to talk about this week. So we've talked about this idea of mandates, which are the must-dos of an organization, the things that that organization has to accomplish. And it's important that everyone within the organization understand what that list of things is. We've talked about stakeholders, right? The people and organizations with a claim on your organization. We've looked at the internal and external environments, and we did that through the device of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges exercise. This last week, you designed a mission statement for the Durham Museum, and the mission statement exercise, as you found, I think, is really sort of intellectually challenging. You just don't sit down and say, this is our mission. You actually have to think about what our mission is and why we're doing what we're doing. And I gave you a chance to discuss with each other your survey, not your survey, but your interview questions with each other. And again, the point of your term project is not simply to write a descriptive report of an organization, but to actually find out why that organization is doing what it's doing. What is its mission and why has it engaged in that mission? And I've given you some other ways of looking at strategic planning. So think about the Jen Lockman videos. And the point of that was to let you know that, strategic planning is not some cookbook. There is more than one way of thinking about strategic planning and thinking about strategic management for an organization. And it's not simply some step-by-step protocol that you can follow and get magic results. And so this week, we're going to discuss another concept that a man named Mark Moore came up with back in 1995, and it's called the strategic triangle. So the big question that Mark Moore asked back in 1995, and he's written a couple other books since then, a more recent one. He wrote a book called Creating Public Value, Strategic Management in Government back about 20 years ago now. And now he's written a new book lately called Recognizing Public Value. But Moore is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and he wanted to think about how government organizations specifically, and then he later applied it to nonprofits, how they create this thing called public value. And so right at the outset, I want to say, don't confuse the term public value with the term values. My values are literally the things I value, the things that are important to me. So for example, I value integrity. I value, let's say, good dental hygiene or something. So those are my values. Value, it really gets to what is it that an organization creates that provides something within the society that society values. And so there's a difference between public value and private value, and that's what Moore was initially setting out to define. I've assigned you some readings, and note that in your Bryson and Alston workbook, your text, I told you to look at pages 5, 7, 10, and 16. And you're going to look at those, and what you're going to see is those are diagrams about the strategic planning process. And I just want you to have those in your mind, because really those diagrams are applicable for a strategic planning process and an internal look really at an organization. And Moore is trying to take us from the outside in. So I've assigned you 3 readings, 3 articles written by Moore or more and co-authors. And I'm not having you read the entire piece in each case. So the first work, More 2000, I want you to look at pages 196 through 202. That second piece there, I want you to look at pages 9 through 18. And the third one, I want you to look at pages 1 through 10. And in each of those, he's setting out this concept that he calls the strategic triangle. And of course, you're watching this weekly lecture right now, and that's going to help you a lot. For the discussion board, now we are going to apply this notion of the strategic triangle to the Omaha Police Department. And I selected the police department for this discussion for this semester because police departments have really been under fire lately, and they've been controversial lately, right? And if you follow the news at all, you note that some police departments have been criticized for their use of force decisions. And some police departments have been very defensive about that. Some have been very open about change. And I'm not here to actually condemn or justify any police department. But, I think we realize that police departments are a necessary part of government. And so the real question that we're going to be asking is, how does the Omaha Police Department, or any police department for that matter, create this thing called public value? So that's what we're going to talk about in the discussion board. Okay, so here's some basic concepts that Moore talks about when it comes to creating public value. And I took this from the 2000 article. So let's compare the for-profit sector with the public sector, which would be nonprofit and governmental sectors in this usage. And let's compare them across these 4 dimensions: goals, the principal source of revenue, the measure of performance, and the key calculation. So again, what is the goal of an organization? Well, in the for-profit sector, generally, the goal is to enhance shareholder wealth. Well, you might not have shareholders. You might not be a traded corporation, for example. You might be a private business. You might own your own business. You might just have a partnership, say your construction business. But your goal is to enhance your wealth. Now, you might not get what you consider wealthy by owning your own construction business, for example. But you're certainly not going to launch a construction business if you expect to lose money. And if you do lose money, at some point you're going to close your construction business. So your goal is to at least make an income off of your business. And in the corporate sense, the goal is to enhance shareholder value. But in the public sector, your goal is to achieve some social mission, right? If you're a food bank, your goal is to be able to have enough food to meet the demand for people who need it, who need that kind of support. If you are a government organization, let's say one I was associated with, the Department of Defense, our goal was to defend the United States. So that's a really big, huge, kind of nebulous goal. And so it's helpful to come up with more concise, more concrete statements of what your mission is. All right, let's get to the principal source of revenue. Again, if you're a for-profit company, if you're a corporation, or even a closely held company, the revenue that you get is from the sale of products and services, right? So we know that lately, actually just within this last week, McDonald's announced that they're going to start serving breakfast all day. I don't know if all of you saw that. Well, actually, I'm one of those people. I don't go to McDonald's that much, honestly. But sometimes when I do, I've been to McDonald's at 10:45 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, and I said, hey, I'd like an Egg McMuffin, because actually on the McDonald's menu, that's one of the things I do like. And they say, well, sorry, it's past 10:30 a.m. Well, hey, this last week, McDonald's said that they're going to start serving limited breakfast items all day long. And I will guarantee you McDonald's is doing that to increase revenue because they know there are a lot of people like me who wander in at 2 in the afternoon and say, I'd like an Egg McMuffin. And so they hope to increase revenue. In the public sector, the source of revenue are charitable contributions or tax appropriations, right? So we know that there is controversy about taxes. There are people who say we should limit taxes or we should have no taxes. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's true, but you have to realize that those tax appropriations do support some services that government provides. How about the measure of performance? Well, in the for-profit sector, this has been simplified a lot. People just say, well, the bottom line, which by that they mean monetary profit. There are actually people who say, hey, look, there's more than one bottom line. Robert Kaplan, also of Harvard, but he's in the business school, he famously came up with something called the triple bottom line, and he was talking about corporations. He wasn't talking about the public sector. He said there's a triple bottom line for businesses. There is the economic bottom line in profit. There's the social bottom line. How does the corporation impact socially? And there's the environmental bottom line. We often talk about something in economics called externalities. And the famous example of an externality is the pollution that a factory might emit in the creation of whatever products it's making. And we typically had a very hard time monetizing the externality of pollution. So, yes, simplistically, the bottom line is the measure of performance for a private company. But in the public sector, how do we measure our performance? Well, typically and classically, a lot of government organizations will measure their efficiency. I can pave so many yards of road per $100, or it's going to cost me, $100,000 per half mile of road. Something like that. And you work to drive down those numbers so that you can make efficient use of taxpayer money. So, again, even in the public sector, those are fairly simplistic. We talk about efficiency and effectiveness, but there may be other considerations in the public sector, such as equity. We talked about Metro, the bus company. Yes, it wants to be more efficient, but it may also have another measure of performance, which might be something like, how do I ensure that people who really need public transportation are able to get it? How are my bus routes constructed to enable those people to actually get on the bus without having to walk 5 miles to catch the bus? And then this last thing is the key calculation. So what is the key calculation that these two different types of sectors make? For a for-profit business, it's finding and exploiting a distinctive competence of the firm by positioning it in the market. So again, let's go back to our construction company business. You may, for example, be a person who rebuilds kitchens. And you've actually found that you have a market in a certain area of the city where a lot of people might, for example, be fixing up old houses, and you are just the perfect person, the perfect business to be there because your specialty is designing and installing, say, luxury kitchens in old houses. And so you're trying to exploit that so that you can maximize your profit. And in the public sector, the key calculation is finding better ways to achieve your mission. And that might mean bringing more people into your business. We talked about the Durham Museum last week. How does the Durham Museum find better ways to bring people into the museum, for example? Okay, so here is this idea of the strategic triangle that Moore came up with in 1995, and it has three legs. And those interlocking circles, they do resemble a triangle. So there are two support legs, and they're called capacity and legitimacy and support. And those two support legs support the third thing, which is called public value. So that is the substance of what we're driving at, this idea of public value. So what is capacity? Well, capacity is that thing that the organization needs to support its mission. So some elements of capacity within your organization. Capacity consists of skilled personnel. It consists of your budget and how you manage your budget. It might consist of facilities. There may be other elements of capacity. In fact, there are, and I'd like you to think of what some of those other elements might be. And another question is, does the capacity equation change based on whether you're talking about a government organization or a nonprofit agency? Does a nonprofit need certain facilities? Do governments need facilities? Are there things that are intangible that are part of capacity? And so what the manager has to do is manage downwards towards operational capacity, which means that manager has to understand these internal customers. And that manager has to build capacity in an efficient way. That second support leg is this thing called legitimacy and support. So what a manager is trying to do here is understand, say, political expectations and understand the authority. What is the authorizing environment? I think Moore uses that term in one of the writings. What's the authorizing environment that establishes that organization? Legitimacy and support. This actually might also relate to something we talked about earlier called mandates. So there are some elements of legitimacy and support. There's this authorizing environment, the laws maybe that set up the organization, the public's view of the organization. And again, there may be others. And that same question, does this idea of legitimacy and support change whether we're talking about a government agency or a nonprofit agency? And then finally, what we're all striving for is to create this thing called public value. So what is it that we deliver to the public, our organization, that is of value to society or to certain members of society? So in this case, if you're the manager, you're managing outwards towards the creation of value and the effectiveness of your programs. But to do that, you have to understand these conceptual customers, right? You know, if I'm running my construction company, I know who my customers are. My customers are the people who hired me to rebuild their kitchen. And so I'm going to work towards their expectations, but it's often more difficult in the public sector to understand who these conceptual customers are, because they can include a whole raft of people, elected officials, citizens, even people from outside your jurisdiction. And so there are some elements of public value, because demanded services, we have to deliver those in a cost-effective manner. We have to deliver services in an equitable manner. There may be other elements of public value, and in fact, there are. And how do these values of efficiency, effectiveness, and equity work together? And does this value equation change, again, based on whether you're talking about a public organization or a nonprofit agency? Now, I asked you to look at some different things, and this is just one of them. This is the 10-step diagram, but I asked you to look at all those different ways that Moore and Alston depict this strategic planning process. Because actually what I want you to think about is, how does Moore, fit into this 10-step process? And in fact, he does fit into this 10-step process, but we're not going to actually ask about that in the discussion board. But thinking about that actually helps you think about why we're doing strategic planning in the first place. So finally, here's a few questions to consider. Who defines public value? Right? Is it elected officials? Is it the citizenry? Is it businesses in your area? Who defines that? A second question, how do these things like cost effectiveness, efficiency in production, democracy, and equity, how do they all work together, or how do they conflict? And then, is public value a perception only, or can we actually measure it? Does public value differ depending on whether we're talking about a nonprofit organization or a government entity? And how does the organization actually plan to deliver public value? Does it plan at all? Does it even understand if it does deliver public value? Or do the people in the organization just go about their daily tasks of filling out forms and, for 8 hours a day and then going home? I mean, does the organization actually plan on delivering public value?